So it's been about 2 weeks since the release of the Demon Slayer movie in theaters, and if you haven't seen it at this point, that's tough. But I went to see it on release night with my younger brother, and honestly, it was just about everything I could have asked for as a Demon Slayer fan. The movie was almost flawless. The sheer success and size of it in general just really goes to show you how popular and widespread anime has become in the recent years, because like 10 years ago or something this would have been unheard of as far as the numbers that it's been doing. And it's crazy too, because this is not a movie you can just go into and watch out of nowhere. This is the final arc of a really popular anime series, so just about everybody going in, unless they're a weirdo of some sort, has seen everything leading up to this point. And chances are, if you've seen Demon Slayer, you've probably seen something else. Unless it's your first anime, then welcome to the community. But I'm personally, as well, somebody who is anime only for this movie. I refuse to read the Demon Slayer manga. No shade to the author or anything like that. I do read manga myself. I'm not just entirely an anime only person, but for something like Demon Slayer, I feel like it's just way too beautiful to not experience on the big screen. So today I'm going to go over the general pros and cons that I feel like there were for this movie, as well as just going through the events that took place in the movie itself and my general thoughts on them in chronological order. There will be spoilers in this review, so just be forewarned. And I know a lot of other YouTubers and film reviewers that have been talking about this show have been doing it more so from an angle of comparing it to the manga. As I've said, I haven't read the manga, so I don't have that source to cross-reference. These are entirely blind opinions to it. I don't know what's going to come next, so please also do not spoil it in the comments. So first, I'm actually going to be talking about the cons here, which there are very, very few of them. One of them being the length, kind of. The movie is 2.5 hours long, which is about the equivalent of 7 to 8 anime episodes. And I'm no stranger to binging that much personally, but if you are somebody who struggles to sit still for long periods of time and maybe had to go to the bathroom or whatever and didn't use it beforehand, then yeah, that might have been an issue. But I don't think length is necessarily a problem with the movie itself, because once it does release on Crunchyroll, you can just watch it at your own pace. It was also pretty heavily advertised that this movie would be 2.5 hours long, so if you're somebody who decided to go to the theater and then ended up complaining about how long it was, you need to grow up. The other con being flashbacks. And don't get me wrong, before you pull out the pitchforks, the flashbacks shown were absolutely incredible. I just have sort of a minor issue with the way they were placed throughout the film, because it felt like they sort of broke up momentum in a lot of spots with the way they were structured. But don't get me wrong, the stories they told were absolutely phenomenal, and I will get into those later on. And the final con being just the amount of couples I saw at the theater cosplaying Tanjiro and Nezuko, and I feel like you should already know what is wrong with that. Now for the pros, we got animation, obviously. I mean, Ufotable has been on top of the game since day one. Look at what they were doing with Fate Zero back in 2010. I mean, that was crazy. The CGI usage as well, some of the greatest CGI I've ever seen in anime to this date, looked absolutely flawless with Doma's techniques and just the demons that you saw in the Infinity Castle itself. The lighting was absolutely fantastic. The art direction was beautiful. The soundtrack, absolutely unmatched, top tier. And just the POV that we got to see from the different Hashira and Demon Slayers in the Infinity Castle, switching around, was just so magnificent. Everything visually about this movie and anything sensory related was just so undeniably satisfying, and I feel like that's something you can always expect to get with something like Demon Slayer. On the other hand, there was also the Infinity Castle itself. I mean, you can take anything we've seen from any of the previous trailers or the finale of the Hashira training arc or anything that we've seen of the Infinity Castle previously and multiply that by 1,000, because you can't even imagine how insane it was here. I mean, it was like you were in a roller coaster, especially enhanced by the IMAX screen itself. I mean, if you're somebody with motion sickness, that might be something to pay a little bit of attention to, but personally, I thought it was absolutely incredible, and it really gave off the feeling of the castle being infinite. Just seeing a lot of the underutilized characters like Shinobu, Giyu, and the other Hashira really getting their times to shine and going all out in combat. So yeah, roughly that is the pros and cons. Now I'm going to go over the fights that took place in order. So the movie was split up into 3 main sections after the introduction. Speaking of which, absolutely love what they did with the beginning. There was no tons of exposition thrown into place at the start. We were just immediately thrown where we were left off from the Hashira training arc into everybody falling into the Infinity Castle and just starting at 100 from the top. And that was beautiful to see. The first about half hour or so in terms of the main content was focused on Shinobu's fight with Doma, and it was just such an emotionally driven storyline. Doma is just an asshole, bro. You know, with a lot of the other demons that you see, a lot of them, when they regain their memories or you see their little flashbacks, you see they were people who struggled in their past lives. They were people who had a lot of love in their hearts and just things went south for them in one way or another. But Doma, this guy was just, he was just a bad person from the start, and that only made him so much worse as a demon. You could tell the struggle that Shinobu was going through in this fight. I feel like it was so well displayed, just her feelings for her sister, the amount of times we were shown their relationship in the flashback, and you could feel the intensity as well of her hatred towards Doma. For somebody who is usually so calm as Shinobu, it was a side of her that we don't often get to see. Here we got to see her pull out basically all the stops, using every technique in her arsenal, including some that even we could have never guessed she had. Her speed was absolutely blinding, and I feel like the show did a really great job at showcasing just how devastating it was. I was honestly kind of taken aback by the ending of that, where Shinobu lost and died, because that is entirely subversion of expectations. I mean, I feel like I've been watching so many other shonen recently and kind of forgot that that is something that can happen to important characters. I mean, One Piece and Black Clover and such with all their death baiting, right? But I was expecting Shinobu, especially once all of her techniques just stopped working. You could tell Doma was just toying with her, and I was half expecting somebody to just come in at the last second and save her, but no, that was it. And I think that subversion of expectations at the start too, especially in the very first fight, really gave us the level of stakes that we could expect from this arc, because nobody is safe out here. I mean, Ahashira died in the first like third of the movie, which is insane. And Kanao's reaction to Shinobu's death as well was just absolutely bone chilling. It was heartbreaking. It was everything you love to see or hate to see if you are a Shinobu fan. Next up, we had Zenitsu versus Upper 6 Kaigaku, and this is one of those times where I was kind of kicking myself for not really refreshing on everything Demon Slayer before going into this movie, because the last time I'd watched Demon Slayer was when the Hashira training arc had come out, and it's been a while since then. But I did not remember Kaigaku as a character. I was kind of blaming myself for that, but then I found out that he actually was only really briefly mentioned back in like season 1. So this is kind of another fault, I think, of the series. When Zenitsu pulled up, they kind of played it off like you know who this guy is, how it's supposed to be like a crazy reveal, but it just didn't really stick. I was kind of confused at who he was. And I think the show kind of also realized that, because there was a lot of exposition done on Kaigaku's character, his backstory, their relationship, and everything. It's kind of like, okay, this is who this guy is, and this is why you should care about his relationship with Zenitsu. But this fight was absolutely spectacular. I mean, Zenitsu pulling out all the stops once again, the dynamic between him only knowing first form and Kaigaku knowing every form except the first form, and then Zenitsu at the end being able to unlock the 7th form of thunder breathing, and just especially the lightning sounds in the theater with the surround audio is, oh my god, that was chef's kiss. Once again, the sound design for this film was absolutely phenomenal. It is something that cannot be understated. The visuals, the soundtrack, everything playing into it. I would go as far as saying that Zenitsu's final attack against Kaigaku is probably the single most hype moment in the entire movie, though it is not the best fight overall, because that one goes to the final fight. And I say final even though this really took up over half of the movie itself, which was Giyu and Tanjiro versus Akaza. And I think everyone kind of expected that this would be a main event going into the movie, but boy was it done spectacularly. Everything from Akaza's first entrance, everybody sensing his presence, and just the way he showed up to jump Tanjiro and Giyu was straight up bone chilling. And sorry to say for all the Rengoku fans out there, but it was pretty obvious from even the start of this fight that he was absolutely getting toyed with on the Mugen Train. He had zero chance of actually ever defeating Akaza. I feel like Akaza was just in it for the fun at that point, because the level of abilities that we saw from him right off the bat against Tanjiro and Giyu were absolutely insane. I mean, this did not even feel like the same character at all. We got crazy hand-to-hand combat abilities, honestly reminding me of Naruto or JJK level choreography. It was insane. I mean, Akaza fighting with his hands against Giyu and Tanjiro's swordplay was crazy. And even though I know that there was obviously a very clear reason for it, I just think the fact that Tanjiro kind of standing around and glazing Giyu in his head while he was getting beat up was just a little bit funny. Just a little bit funny. Giyu unlocking his Demon Slayer mark, especially after all of the self-doubt that we witnessed him going through during the Hashira training arc, was also just one of the hypest moments for sure. Just all the things they had to put together to defeat Akaza, with Tanjiro having to see the transparent world and having multiple different flashbacks of things he's learned from the past from his father and everybody else, and Giyu just doing everything he can to stay in the game. You could tell the intensity was there. I mean, the level of strength that we were seeing from Akaza here and just his abilities in general, it really reminded me of almost Ulquiorra from Bleach, where he wasn't the #1 ranked Espada, but was clearly the one who was just giving the audience the best show by far, fighting the main character and just being absolute balls to the walls, batshit insane. And I feel like that was kind of the deal with Akaza here. He wasn't even Upper Moon 1, but considering Doma was Upper Moon 2, even despite how on the back foot we saw Shinobu was during that fight, Akaza was just, he felt like on an entirely different level altogether. And I mean, even on top of everything else, everything we saw Giyu and Tanjiro go through, all the power-ups they received, all the techniques they learned to cipher through, it was just crazy to see that all of that was not enough to defeat Akaza. Even when he had his head cut off, his resilience was insane. And let's be so for real here, if Akaza didn't regain his memories and end up taking himself out through guilt, I think Giyu and Tanjiro would have been cooked. But Akaza's backstory was just one of the most beautiful moments we've seen in Demon Slayer as a whole. It really makes you feel for this guy. I mean, sorry once again to Rengoku fans, but I forgive him. I forgive Akaza for that. Just the amount of trauma this kid had to go through during his life cannot be understated. And I think this is kind of where like one of my little cons comes into place too, because yes, Akaza's backstory was absolutely phenomenal, but I think the way it was kind of structured and split up, there were a couple scenes that were just played maybe 2 or 3 times, the exact same scene, and there were also a few times where it would be like a mid-clash, right? A sword would be coming against his fist or something, and then just bam, we got a cutscene right there with the backstory. I think that kind of little beat break there definitely kind of slowed the momentum a little bit, and I think especially getting towards the end of the movie with that 2.5-hour runtime, that's when it started to play more into effect, because it felt like it dragged just a little bit. I mean, regardless, the story we were told was phenomenal, and just the fight, him finally waking up and realizing that the person he had hated his entire life was actually himself, was both incredibly heartbreaking, but also just such a cool moment in terms of storytelling. But yeah, I mean, that about does it for kind of my general thoughts on the movie as a whole. Like I said, this is just about everything you could have wanted from the Demon Slayer movie. It was a bit long, but very, very worth sitting through the entire time. And overall, I would probably give it a 9.5 out of 10. Not a perfect 10, just because, like I said, the backstory structure was kind of a little bit iffy for me, but I'm not a movie writer, and I feel like there was definitely a reason for them to do it that way. I wonder if there was a different way to have done it, but it felt like it sort of fell into place at the end. So maybe that point 0.5 score taken off was just my own little personal griping. Now we gotta wait another 2 years for part 2 and another 2 years after that for part 3. But I do like that this movie didn't actually end on like a crazy cliffhanger. I think all of the main plot lines that needed to be resolved did get resolved, and that's something that I really do appreciate. So while I am excited for the next parts, it definitely didn't leave me feeling blue balled at the end, which I very much appreciate. So thank you, Ufotable, for that. But yeah, just let me know if you have anything that you heavily agree or disagree with that I've said here. And as always, have yourself a beautiful day. Peace.